Environmental Justice Lab. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me, and Happy New Year. It's a new year, everybody. I haven't had a chance to tell you on the podcast, but Happy New Year. I hope you made it through the holiday season. I hope you made it out of 2024. Whatever was going on that year is over. And it's a new year. It's a new season of the podcast. It's season 4. It's very exciting. A lot's going on, a lot to talk about, a lot to discuss. And so I cannot wait to get into it with everyone this year. It's going to be another great season on the podcast. I mean, where to begin, right? So in the United States, at least, in a few days, we have a new president who is not as keen on the idea of environmental justice as I would like. And I would imagine that things are going to be different with how the environment's regulated, how the work is funded to fight for environmental justice, and how people who are dealing with these issues are going to be able to engage the federal government on getting them addressed. And so there's going to be a lot to talk about as it relates to the ways in which this incoming administration deals with the environment and environmental justice in particular. One thing I'm curious about, all of those initiatives and all of those, offices and advisory councils and boards that were established to confront environmental justice, will those be around? Will they even be in existence anymore? Will there be a White House coordinator on environmental justice? I doubt it, but it's a question, right? Because all the executive orders, all of the proclamations, all the different positions that the previous administration had put in place to allow for environmental justice work to be done, like I said last year, new administration doesn't have to keep any of that. With a stroke of a pen, they can just undo it all, take that money back, do something different. So I'm curious to see what happens with that. What happens to that infrastructure that the previous administration tried to put in place to confront environmental justice? Is it going to still be there? In the United States, I have my doubts about that. But we'll be looking at it. I'm curious to see what happens. I want to know what the plan is. Not just for the administration and the government and all those people, but what about us? Those of us on the ground, from city to city, state to state, who applied for these grants and got funded, who are running these nonprofit organizations with grant funding to do the hard work of getting things done in our communities. What are we going to do? What's going to happen if, or more likely when, those resources are taken away and reallocated? What's the plan? We have to have a plan, a way forward in terms of continuing the fight for environmental justice. And so we'll be looking at that this year. It's going to be really, really interesting. What else is going on? So yesterday afternoon, I just saw that there was an agreement between Israel and Hamas to have a ceasefire in Gaza. Great news. That's great news. All year long, we've been talking about a ceasefire. We need to end the war, end the fighting, end the conflict, end the death, end the destruction, so they can rebuild and figure out an actual solution to this situation in Israel and in Palestine. We can't just have nonstop fighting and nonstop civilian death and casualties and malnutrition and famine and disease and all these things that came along with the war. So I'm glad that there's an agreement. Obviously, it has to be carried out. Hostage releases, prisoner exchanges, humanitarian aid coming in. We also need to make sure that the people can go back to their homes, back to where they're from. How are we going to rebuild? How are we going to rebuild this thing? Because there's a whole lot that needs to happen. I wrote an article about this in The Conversation. It's an online magazine for academics, and doing the research on the environmental impact of this war, I learned a lot of things. For instance, just removing the debris from the Gaza Strip is estimated to cost around $700 million. $700 million just to remove the rubble from the strip. That's a lot of money. I don't know where it's coming from. It's a lot of money. The World Bank estimated that the war has caused, and this was back like in June when they did this estimate, $18.5 billion with a B, billion dollars worth of damage has been done because of this war in the Gaza Strip. Everything you can think of has been destroyed. Every aspect of life has been destroyed. I think we're at around 48,000 known civilian casualties from this war. The hostages, a lot of them died while they were in custody, while they were being held hostage during this war. And so there are so many issues that were being discussed last year. And so I'm glad this new year we have a ceasefire and some breathing room to think about the next phase of what it will look like in this occupied territory. So that happened. What else is going on? Oh, so if you don't know, I am a research professor at the University of South Carolina, and so I'm doing research. And so things are being published now. I mentioned that conversation article earlier. Other more academic research is being published, and so I'll be giving you updates on that, what I'm learning, what I'm seeing, what's happening, and what I'm reporting on in terms of the research aspects of things will be discussed on the podcast as well. So you'll get publication alerts where I'll just send you or at least direct you to a recent article that I've written or that I've co-authored that really dives into an environmental justice issue. We'll talk about it. We'll cite some of the statistics, some of the data that we've gathered, and we'll talk about it, right, on the podcast this year. It's going to be a big year. It's going to be a big year. New guests are coming to the podcast, right? So I'm already recording episodes with a student at Ohio Wesleyan University. Her name is Savannah. She's talking about legacy environmental justice. We're going to talk about what she's talking about, how it looks in her hometown, and what happens next with what's going on there. Very exciting stuff. I got a phone call. Well, I got an email, and then we had a phone call with the executive director of the Coastal Carolina River Watch organization. They are working with communities in the coast of North Carolina to address their environmental justice concerns. And there's tons of them. Issues with food, issues with pollution, issues with sea level rise, climate change. All of these things are not being addressed in these communities, which are primarily Black African American communities. And so we're going to talk about it. We're going to discuss it. Hopefully I get a chance to go up and do some real research and understand it and contribute in some meaningful way to helping these communities deal with these issues, because there are lots of issues. So we're going to talk about it this year on the podcast. And of course, there's going to always be some type of issue that comes up because it happens every year. Some oil spill, some accidental discharge, some court case that diminishes the ability of people to regulate contamination in the environment. So many different things that keep happening. We're going to just keep track of them. We're going to keep up with them because it's important to know. And this year, I'm going to do better this year. I'm going to do better thinking more globally about this issue of environmental justice. I know I get stuck in my U.S. policy, political discourse, and it's important, but there's stuff happening around the world that we need to be aware of. In the Middle East, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, Saudi Arabia. We have to talk about Africa, West Africa, South Africa, North Africa. We have to talk about these places, different parts of Asia, even out in Australia. We need to broaden our view of environment. At least I do. Maybe you already had that broad view. And if so, please share it, because I need to get a bigger view of this movement and what the fight looks like in different parts of the world, because it's very different. Different communities, different concerns, different issues. Everything is different when you look outside of your own country. And so I want to be able to do that and spend some time on that as well. So if you're listening and you got some ideas, please send them my way. I would love to hear them. If you're from a particular country, a particular part of the world that doesn't get the coverage it needs, it doesn't have the reach that you would like it to have, hey, send me an email, send me a message. We can talk about it. I would love to talk about it. And so we're going to be doing that all this year. And so I'm very excited about it. So I hope that you're excited about the new year, because I know I am. I know different people have different views of what the year could look like. But what we're going to do on the podcast is make sure that we talk about these issues. We lift up the marginalized voices and the marginalized communities, and we continue to push people towards a view of the world that has justice at the center of it, that has justice as the guiding principle for how things are done and how decisions are made and how we operate in these different societies. We need to keep justice front and center. And on the podcast, we're all about environmental justice. So please stay tuned. It's going to be a great year. Happy New Year to all of you. And we're going to have a lot of fun this year. So enjoy the podcast. Continue to subscribe and continue to share it with your friends. Anybody you think is interested, continue to reach out to me. I will respond. I promise you I will. And we got a lot in store. So stay tuned. This is the Environmental Justice Lab, where we are for the people and for the planet. I'll see you next time.